Welcome to week 2 of our science fiction class. I'm right now looking at some of the forum responses, and I am elated that so many students here are connecting the fact that the first half of Brave New World is about the structure of that society. And many people are making the leap to the fact that it is not only about the structure of that society, but it is about the structure of our contemporary society. We're going to look at some comments and some of my replies to dig into the structure of our society and what Brave New World has to say about it. Brogan gives us a really interesting perspective when he writes, I've seen a lot of different vices, but everyone has. Now, I'm from the Midwest, where there is literally nothing to do except drink and eat. He's referring to the use of soma and drugs from Brave New World. Our culture is centered around those two things. Binging is extremely normalized. Well, let's look at his use of the word binging there and think about how we're using it for video nowadays too, which also kind of seems like a somatic drug. It could be my sample is inherently biased. Well, thanks for recognizing that. We all need to recognize our bias. But having worked those jobs, I believe service industry workers would put up with half the things they are expected, oh shucks and doodles, expected to do if they weren't able to go out and party and forget about the things that they have to do. I think he means wouldn't put up with half the things they have to do if they didn't get to have soma. Amen, Brogan, and thank you for that. And it feels like that's a ding on how closely associated our culture is with the culture from Brave New World. I'm replying to your third question. I see it as very relevant to this examination of structure of our world. So in Brave New World, life is easy and drugs ubiquitous. You seem to suggest that in our world, life is hard and the drugs ubiquitous, and the result is the same. We're all on them. In short, you seem like you agree with Huxley's assertions. No need to respond. Just wanted to just sort of establish that. Feels like it anyway. If I'm wrong, go ahead and reply to the comment. Adding a response to someone who suggested that our vaccine response to COVID-19 has something, could be interpreted as having anything to do with a kind of totalitarian control over the populace. I dare say, and I'll just section of third response is terrifying. A vaccine is so different from mood-altering substance that I wouldn't begin to know where to begin. That is a great case of apples and oranges. I think the U.S. death toll secondary to COVID-19 is approaching 700,000. I think that's the last number that I heard recently. That's more than the combined totals of the deaths in foreign wars. It does not include the Civil War, of course. Just to say, there's zero connection between totalitarianism and vaccine. We've been having vaccines since, polio or before. I am not a scientist. I don't, all I can say is that the polio vaccine changed all of our lives. And the COVID-19 vaccine is no different than that. It's my hope that everybody's going to feel comfortable throughout our class. And when we talk about race and caste in the United States, we are going to run into difficulties in the United States. And here we are. I quote from a student who has written, "The idea that race plays a role in modern-day caste system is a ploy to control the masses. Honestly, this idea literally creates segregation and should be kept out of school." I have replied to that moment in our threads by saying, your response to question 5 has me wondering about the statistics relating to the numbers of black men in our society, killed by police versus the other relevant ratios relating to police killings. I did miss the word in the killing. Oops. Anyway, I hope that this makes sense. But the graph tends to validate that despite representing a vastly lower percentage of our population, blacks are killed at an extraordinarily higher ratio. So the discussion of caste and race in the United States, far from being some kind of ploy by the government, actually highlights inequalities that really deserve to be addressed. I believe one of my important obligations in this class is to keep my videos a little bit short, and this one's getting a little long, and there's also another one that I want you to watch as well. But I want to say that I am so enjoying watching your interactions in our forums. That is what I wanted to say. But also, it is good that we are being courageous. There is a question about caste in the United States, and it makes some of us very uncomfortable. Our country was born in blood, you know, and we had to conduct a revolution to exist, and then we had economic disagreements between the North and the South, as well as arguments about slavery. So how does this all relate to a science fiction class? Well, it's in the discussions. I have been reading the discussions. I haven't been commenting on every single one. But one, I'm so heartened that so many incredible insights are happening. But two, the reverberations from Shakespeare. That's good, Chris. Oh yeah, there's a lot of Shakespeare in our book, but no. The reverberations from slavery, Jim Crow, and racial oppression continue to plague and demean our country. Of course, the topic of how does caste present itself in the United States, one of the easiest ways to see it is in the ratios of black people murdered without trial by police versus ratios from other races. That's just one. Of course, we can look at redlining laws. Anyway, there's so much. There is so much, so many ways that we can see caste still at work. The sections in the first 100 pages, all those repeated references to the Hypnopedia. And you'll forgive me, it's early. I'm trying to make this heaven for you guys. So I don't have that line. But it's like, I don't like deltas. Like these are betas who are being conditioned while there's something like, they are not good. I can't remember. But every time reading it this time, reading through this time, I thought about that Hypnopedia. I thought of the way that as a child I watched a lot of television, and I could literally double the pleasure, double the fun, double mint gum. I can still, as a 55-year-old weirdo on a Sunday morning trying to create a video for a fantastic science fiction class, I can still recall that. I can probably hey, Mikey, he likes it. These are, you don't know these. If you search those quotes in YouTube, you'll see the my Hypnopedia from when I was 7 and 8 years old. That was a reference, I think it was Life cereal? I can't remember. All I remember are the images that I was fed, constantly fed. And what were they? What were the images that I saw? My society, according to the commercials that I watched, was comprised of strictly good-looking white people. So it's which is not true. My society was a diverse society filled with people of all different races. But what I was fed by the media was pretty an untrue vision of my world. So I was manipulated into a biased perspective that privileged my own group. And one of the most challenging and difficult features that people might have is kind of recognizing our own hypnopedic conditioning and then going, take a deep breath. So, how have I been shaped and created by my own hypnopedic conditioning. And hypnopedia, obviously we don't have a hypnopedia. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for the words that come out of the mouths of our parents. It's a metaphor for the words that surround us. That's what that's Huxley's use of the hypnopedia here. Does he envision that there would have been that? I think so. I dare say. And he's been right about so much. But for our purposes, in terms of understanding our own conditioning and the structure of our society. And by the way, I am featuring, I think I mentioned that we have that out there. I love the United States. I want everybody to know that. I love that our roads are paved. I love that the lights come on. I love that we are safe as we exit our homes. We don't ever have to worry about, strangers murdering us. Mostly. I mean, it happens. But so I just want to know that as a person who is aware that I need to become more aware of the diversity of our nation, of the ways that caste has oppressed my fellow citizens. Like, this is what breaks my heart, is that my fellow citizens may not have had as much access to democracy as I have had. They may not have had, anyway, I have been given more access. I have received more access. And that's caste. That's what this chapter is about. It's not the easiest thing to examine. Certainly can make some of us uncomfortable. And that's okay. I'd like to take another peek. Now, this is in the next 200 pages, but this reading, I've been reading it with you. I want you guys to know that. Love it. Love it. Read it every time. And I'm trying not to bury everybody with Shakespeare, kind of. I love Shakespeare, and I love that almost 10% of this book is about Shakespeare. So I'm just trying, and of course, Huxley uses Shakespeare to, I think, bridge the gap for how well, frankly, John Savage fits into London society. You guys aren't there yet. You might not be there yet, but he fits in really well. Oh, shucks, guys. I'm trying to end this, and all these different thoughts have been occurring to me as I've been reading it this time. And I want to talk about literature. This is a science fiction literature class. So why is it that, here in 2021, we're still reading this book? It's not just because it was visionary, but because it's literary as well. And what makes it literary? In fact, all of those Shakespearean allusions that deepen its cultural resonance and meaning. So allow me to explain. In the 70s, gosh, I can't remember exactly, but there's an incredible book that I love. I love Logan's Run. I have forgotten the name of the author. Please forgive me, I'm trying to go fast. Logan's Run is one of hundreds of derivative dystopian pieces of fiction that come directly from Brave New World. And in Logan's Run, you can look this up, probably has a great wiki. In Logan's Run, the society is, again, it's populated by young people of, dubious origin. I don't know if they're born or whatever. They could be coming out of test tubes. But the premise that the author wanted to explore was that instead of them being able to live as young people up until their 60s, when they die with healthy bodies and then they get burned in the crematoria, as we have seen in Brave New World, they get killed. I think in the book, actually, it's really awesome because it's just, I think at 24. Now there's a movie where they couldn't do 24. I think it's 24 in the book. Could be 22. It's been a couple days, like a long time since I read that book, but I remember being really startled that the book had posited this, people would only get to live that long. And of course, Logan goes on a run. It's called Logan's Run. He's like, 24 is not enough. 24 is not enough. So it's fantastic. It's a great book. He leaves the society. It's derivative of Brave New World, as so many dystopias are. I got to tell you, heck, even George Orwell's 1984 is derivative of this piece. So we're looking at perhaps one of the titans of dystopian literature. This is it. And what are some of the features that make Huxley's Brave New World lasting? It's, of course, these allusions to the great literature of our past. Now, I have one more thing about Cass that I want to mention, and I have to review this because I'm lagging in my screen, and I need to make sure I'm not lagging in your screen. Ha! There's no lag, which is good. So the video is functional. I'm going to put this video in a pretty low stakes but important forum discussion. So you'll have to watch this. It'll be obvious. It'll be in there. It'll be a due Wednesday forum discussion in addition to something else that's due Wednesday. But imagine it's college. There's a little bit of work to do. In there, I am going to link to another set, a Wikipedia list of other dystopias, because I did in this video call Brave New World an absolute and stone cold titan. A lot of dystopias are written. Now many of them are titans, like Brave New World. I'd like you to just sort of scroll through, see them, and the questions. I'm going to ask you to choose one and to kind of browse through to see if you can, in those plot summaries, capture, something similar that you've noticed in the first 100 pages. So you won't have to have read the entire Brave New World, but some feature. By the way, all dystopias are very similar. Let me talk about another one that precedes Brave New World. And that's, of course, H.G. Wells' Time Machine. Now, wait a second, Chris, the Time Machine, isn't that about a different facet of science fiction called time travel? It is. But in Aldous Huxley's, no. H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, gosh, it's so weird. I'm not assigning it. I think everybody should read that book. It is weird, man. It is so weird. It is so weird. It's a weird, weird book. And allow me to just say that at some point in it, our intrepid time traveler lands in a place where, because of inequality, so it's so fascinating. It's so fascinating what science fiction does. Because of inequality, basically, and the effects of evolution. So inequality and the effects of evolution. And let's go back to Brogan's comment that I mentioned earlier. Brogan, shucks, and I can't remember. I was just looking at Hannah's comment, and it had to do, it's incredible too. Anyway, all your comments are great, but you kind of have your fingers on the pulse that there is a privileged upper class, sort of living the easy life, while there are people out there working hard jobs. Rogan mentions, working, being like an essential worker, and all these people that we rely on for the survival of society. And Hannah mentions, I've just been reading and doing this all morning, so we're just going to have to go with what we've got. But go read everybody's comments. They're incredible. And they remind us about the disparities between the rich and the working class and the poor and all of this. And I would dare say that H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, while it sort of gets its primary concept from time travel, he uses the obvious disparities in his culture and his society at his time, where literally we still had the kind of remnants of that very medieval kind of hierarchical nobility structure. People were just born to rule, and I guess in some sense that's still the case in the super rich. But what H.G. Wells did with it was that he posited a world where the lower caste just got lower and lower, and where the higher caste got progressively higher and higher, and progressively less capable of doing simple things for themselves, so that they were like children in their bodies, the way he describes their bodies. But what is weird, and I am going to throw this out there because our guy comes from like the 1890s, our time traveler, he engages in an actual relationship with a full-grown woman from that society, but he describes her in language that is appropriate for a child. So do with that what you will. It is very weird. I search for anybody who's written papers on that. I'm shudder. I shudder. I find that very gross. She like rides around on his shoulder and he has feelings. I'm not kidding. I am not kidding. That's a weird book. That's a really strange book. What would there'll be questions below that'll explain to you what to do. I have one more thing that I want to look at in our book, and then I'm going to release this video and release you into week 2 to finish Brave New World. On page 124 of our draft, the John Savage, he hated this film. He hated a feelie in a film, and he says things like what John says, Lenina, and like this horrible film. Horrible. Lenina was genuinely astonished, but I thought it was lovely. And now listen to his language here. It's very Shakespearean, and this is what Huxley's doing the whole time, is inserting these kind of Shakespearean phrases. It was base, he said indignantly. It was ignoble. And what was base and what was ignoble? Honest to goodness, you will read the description of that movie and it'll seem like just about anything that's been getting made for the last 30 years. I do want to highlight again about our own hypnopedic manipulation and mind control going on, because a lot of it comes from how different casts in the United States are portrayed in films. It used to be during the 70s. Since the beginning of film, going all the way back to the beginning of film, we have Birth of a Nation. And the very first movie, the very first feature motion picture, it's a silent, it's called Birth of a Nation. It demonizes black people, literally demonizes them, makes them, every bad thing. And all of the movies did this. Moving forward until by the 1970s, there is kind of this flip. We call it the blaxploitation movies, where they flipped the script so that you now had sort of a very cartoonish black hero, which is again still being exploited by the white movie system. But I want to point out some descriptions in Brave New World of the movie. Oh yeah, and by the way, kudos to some of you who in your comments, just there's a lot of anachronism. Like, he didn't get the world right every single time, and I see some of you in the comments mocking Huxley's imprecision and about just a lot of details, like the powder puff. It's funny. It's funny. All right, hang in there. You're almost done with this. This is fantastic. As I go to the section that I wanted to look at today, I had forgotten that a student of mine from the last time I ran through this wrote this. So, you guys are as much a part of the instruction of this course as I am in many ways. Let's go through it together. But Shale, Travis, he wrote about this particular section here. I'll just see if I can zoom in here. Those fiery letters, meanwhile, had disappeared. There were 10 seconds of complete darkness. Then suddenly, dazzlingly, incomparably more solid looking than they would have seemed in actual flash and blood, far more real than reality. There stood the stereoscopic images locked in one another, a gigantic Negro and a golden-haired young brachycephalic beta plus female. And, of course, the rest of the plot of this movie is this, very Victorian kind of, fear of black people. Just ugliest, kind of most racist stuff you'll see. And my student Travis wrote, when Huxley wrote this novel in the 1930s, racial equality was far from reached in almost all major countries in the world. Racial equality. We don't have it today, just to say. But here we see that even in this dystopian future where everyone is made to serve a purpose, derogatory terms are still used to refer to people of color. Only black people within this novel, as far as Savage, Travis, I'm sorry, he's not here, but there are all kinds of epithets for, especially on the reservation. It's horrible. The racism that you guys just read about on the reservation, the squalor. It's horrible. Anyway, he includes a link here to Historic England, UK Region includes Heritage, Another of England's Brief History, Racism and Resistance. That might well be something interesting, but I do want to draw everyone's attention to how similar the description of this entire movie is. It's got special effects, it's got graphics, he really nails it, but what it has more, bless you, almost more than anything is racism and caste. All right. I'm going to let my crummy bandwidth try to upload this video for the next half hour or half a day, whatever it is. It'll be there for you by Monday morning, and there are going to be questions in this as a forum so that I can make sure that folks have viewed. And I hope that, I want to say I appreciate your comments thus far in the forums and continuing. And I hope you're enjoying the class and enjoying this book. And again, there will be a link to another set of dystopias. We're going to sort of ask a question about similarities.